Hey, I'm Lee Balcom, and today we're talking about something pretty important. We're talking about what fuels an affair. Now, this is not just kind of a side shoot of what I normally talk about because so many marriages are disrupted by infidelity, whether they are physical affairs or whether they're emotional affairs. And let me tell you, many times people have a hard time establishing that they're involved or their spouse is involved in an emotional affair because it's pretty easy if it's physical, right? Because there's the physical part. But an emotional part, it's a little harder to define. That is part of why I tackle all of this in my book about recovering from the affair. In fact, titled Recovering from the Affair. The reason that I wrote this is because of how marriages were coming over and over into my office that had been destroyed by the infidelity. And I decided that after having dealt with it for so many years, having helped people deal with it, that we needed to talk about that and be open about that. So I'm going to be very clear, very honest, and very open with you. And by the way, if this is kind of your thing, this is going to be a tough one today. I'm going to dig into the reasons why affairs have such fuel to them, have such fire to them, what keeps them, at least for a short while, really blasting off. This is the rocket fuel for an affair. Now, the reason that we want to tackle this is because an affair does not have to end a marriage. In fact, statistically speaking, people who get to the other side of an affair actually have a higher level of success than those who just kind of fall apart. Why? Well, because they learned a lesson, that their marriage had some issues underlying it that needed to be corrected. Not only that, but they stepped into fixing them, and you can do the same. But first, we have to understand the background of all of this. What actually leads to such difficulties in an affair? Why such power or why such energy? Why is it so hard, as person after person has told me, to break away from the affair? Many times I've had people in my office that were like, I know it's wrong. I know I should be back in my marriage and I should stay away from this other person, but I'm like a moth to a flame, and not just a flame. I mean, it's like a moth to an inferno that they are attracted and keep getting singed. And so they need to understand what's going on because in many ways, you have to treat the after effect of an affair kind of like an addiction. And I'm going to tell you why it ends up being something like an addiction as we talk through these pieces. There are actually a big 5 pieces of this puzzle, but we're going to talk about each one and how they combine together into such a heated thing. So let's jump into this. And let me be clear, I intend on speaking as directly and clearly as possible. So if you find yourself kind of defending where you are in an affair and saying, well, I found my true love, my soulmate, or whatever, I'm going to tell you why that feels that way. More than that, why it's false. In fact, let's use that acronym, FALSE, because altogether these pieces are going to make it feel very real, but they're false. Many times when I first talk with people about this, they are first offended because they don't want to believe that they're stuck in some false relationship. 2, they try to defend themselves. So they're offended and then they end up defending what they're doing. But 3, the reality is, if you talk to most people, they're going to tell you that infidelity is not okay, even though many people fall into that trap. So while they don't approve of it, they find themselves wrapped up in it, believing, justifying that all of this is for real. And it can feel for real. I get that. But it's false. So let's jump into why that's the case. First of all, let's take on the F. The thing about affairs is they are based in fantasy. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're a typical couple, you're dealing with everyday life every day at your house. Couples see each other at their best and at their worst. They see the messiness of life, and they're dealing with kids and griminess and sticky fingers and messes in the house and dirty laundry and holes in the underwear and all of the other pieces that make up real life. The struggle to get out the door in the morning or wherever you need to go, and the struggle of how to get everything together and how do you make the meals fit and all of the other pieces of the puzzle. The schedules of life are crazy. That's real life. And managing it as a team is the task of marriage. So then why is an affair fantasy? Because most people, if not all people, I'm just going to say most because somebody's going to try to prove me wrong when I say all people who are involved in affairs are taking a lot of measures to make sure that everything is just right. When I hear the stories behind the scenes, the fantasies that people are playing out, how they get ready before they go meet their partner and where they meet them in a hotel or some other place and eating fancy foods and buying gifts and all the other pieces that they create of this fantasy, meeting somewhere far away, out of the realm of normal life. That's a fantasy. Real relationships don't just exist in fantasy, they exist in real life. Did you do those things in the beginning with the relationship? Sure. With your spouse, probably. I did. I mean, we tried to go to nice places and we were putting on our best selves for a bit. But after a while, you kind of get to real life. Most people in affairs don't and can't. Why not? Because they have to keep it separate. And so the fantasy is part of how they carry out the relationship. The other fantasy that they have in this is many times an affair partner gets the projections, our internal projections of who this person is. It's not who they are. Many times, when the affair falls apart, as most affairs do, in fact, the vast majority of affairs do fall apart. And when they do, many times the person will say, I don't know what I saw in this person. I don't understand how I got so caught up into this. And I have a one-word explanation. Fantasy. They got caught up in the fantasy of this person, the fantasy of the relationship that they thought they were in. And then they lived out that fantasy, right? And so many times the fantasy kind of overwhelms the judgment of anything else, which leads to the next thing that fuels it all, adrenaline. Adrenaline is that excitement you feel. Many times people say, I'm feeling something in this affair that I haven't felt with my spouse. And I'll often say, how about at the beginning of your relationship? You remember back in the infatuation phase when you had this infatuated feeling for your spouse, now your current spouse, but back then you were kind of falling in. That's adrenaline driven. Now, here's a couple of problems with adrenaline. First of all, we can't live in an adrenaline state for indefinitely. Adrenaline starts burning through our body after a while. We burn out of adrenaline. It runs its course. But along the way, it makes us feel excited. The same adrenaline you go, oh, I'm going to go ride that roller coaster, right, to get the adrenaline charge. Or if you do anything with adventure, like maybe you go hang gliding or parachuting or scuba diving or whatever it is you do for an adrenaline charge, that fuels you. And here is the thing. Our human brains, we get caught up in that adrenaline charge. That's where the addiction piece of this comes in. We get addicted to the feeling, not to the person, but to the feeling that we have. And many times people say, I discovered something that I haven't felt in a long time. That's why I want to hold on to this. In other words, how do I get my fix of adrenaline? But adrenaline will burn out. In a regular relationship, we go from adrenaline attraction to endorphin attraction. What's the difference? Adrenaline has fear based in it. Like, I'm going to lose this person. I got to do something to hold on to this person, or I'm going to get caught, right? And that's another piece of the adrenaline puzzle in affairs is you're always kind of on guard because you might get discovered. You might get found out. And so part of what's drawing all that in, we're going to talk about a little bit more about that detail in just a couple of minutes. But that piece of, I might lose this person. We might be found out. We might be discovered. That creates an adrenaline surge that many people have missed in their relationship, missed in their life. And they mistake that for love. It's not love, it's adrenaline. And so when people are involved in affairs, they're trying to be their best self, right? Because they want to hold on to this person. That's part of that fantasy stuff. And so the adrenaline begins to fit together with the fantasy stuff to create a concoction that we're headed towards rocket fuel. What else fuels it? Lostness. That's the L. F-A-L. Lostness. So lostness is that sense that you don't know where you're going. You're trying to find a new way. You're trying to find something to get you out of where you feel stuck. Your relationship's not getting you where you want to. You're not able to get to the place you want in your marriage because you hit the pause button, or maybe you're having some midlife crisis stuff. Something is bubbling underneath and it makes you feel lost. And the diversion, right, the distraction of this affair helps you not get so feeling of lost. Nobody wants to feel lost. That's a panicky kind of feeling. It's an uncomfortable feeling. So anything that can block that out is helpful. Lostness is part of what creates the scenario where all of this can burn so hot. So now we have the fantasy driven by adrenaline that started in lostness. And let's add to it secrecy. One of the things I had several people, my kind of mentors in my life say, if you can't tell important people about this in your life, you can't tell your spouse about this in your life, if you wouldn't want somebody to know about it, you might want to ask the question, should I be doing this? Right? Is it because I don't want them to know? Is that telling me something about where I am and I shouldn't be? So there's a layer of what happens in affairs based in this secrecy that makes it very toxic right off the bat. But the other piece of that is the secrecy begins to kind of boil all those other pieces, make it hotter, more flammable, because you're having to live a dual life, right? And many people, when they're having an affair, they have to act like in their normal life, around the people that know them, around their family, around their spouse. Nothing different is happening. But they have this secret on the side that is just, kind of heating up within them. And so the secrecy is another piece of the fuel. It's another ingredient of the fuel. When you mix it all together, you get a very potent mix. And so the secrecy that we have going on is one of the things that makes it so powerful. Remember that adrenaline, part of the adrenaline, the fear of being found out? The secrecy is what you're trying to maintain. So you go through these elaborate rituals to try to make sure that the secrecy is held to. And if anybody finds out, you have to swear into secrecy, and you and your partner might be sworn to secrecy, or your spouses and their affair partners are sworn to secrecy, right? Depending on who's watching this particular video. I'm hoping that this will give information both to a person who might be involved in an affair and the spouse who is suffering from the affair. Their spouse is having the affair. And this is designed to help you understand what's going on. That secrecy, what does it create? Lies, dishonesty, a split in your thinking, the dual thinking that you have to keep of living in two worlds. That's a lot of energy. The energy that's the rocket fuel that keeps on going. Which leads to the last one, ego. Now, I'm not saying you have a big ego. We all have ego. But ego is about, what do I want? And in many ways, that's kind of the balance point in a marriage. What do I want? What do I give? How do we be part of this team together? But in this particular piece, ego has several layers to it. I want what I want is the ego crying. I want to be special is the ego crying. I want somebody to think so much of me that they would do anything to be with me. That's the ego crying. And because of that, part of what happens in a marriage that's in trouble is an ego bruise. The ego injury of we're not as connected as we need to be. We're not as connected as we once were. I don't feel as special as I want to. So the ego bruise means that we're also looking for the ego to be fed, right? To be salved, to be comforted. And that's why many times people find themselves pulled into an affair because they had this person paying them attention. They made them feel special. They made them feel important again. And so we begin to see how all of this, when it's put together, creates the rocket fuel of why a marriage in an affair has such danger to it, right? The affair has such power to it, such heat to it. And so that's the reason that it is such a hot issue. But let me tell you something else about rocket fuel. It's explosive. And it doesn't take long for it to burn out. Those two things are important to remember. Rocket fuel, handled poorly, will blow everything up in its path. It'll blow your marriage, your job, your relationship with your family, your kids, your friends, everybody around you. It can blow up pretty easily. The explosion can take everything out that you find to be important. That's the first thing. The second is, no matter how you do it, rocket fuel burns hot and heavy and fast. But once it's gone, the rocket falls back to earth. And then you have to figure out how to clean up the pieces. If your marriage is in trouble, remember how dangerous infidelity can be to the relationship. If your marriage is in trouble because of infidelity, there is a way forward. There is a path forward. You can find my book at theaffairbook.com. That's theaffairbook.com. You can also find it wherever you like to get your books. But do make sure that you understand how dangerous this is, how potent that mixture is, and decide that you can move through it. It's telling you that something is wrong in your marriage. Not that your marriage is wrong, but something needs to be fixed. And if I can help with that, come visit me at savethemarriage.com. That's savethemarriage.com. This is Lee Balcom, wishing you the best as you continue to work to save your marriage.